Hello, hello. This is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. No, wait a second. It's not the SonicScoop podcast. It is more MixCon. We are deep into MixCon 2025, and today we are doing a MixCon workshop that is all about speakers. And we're going to go over, I'd say, the 5 most common mistakes people make around studio monitors and studio monitoring. We are going beyond the speakers to look at not just studio monitors, but monitoring as an entire system, because that is the number one mistake that I think so many people make with studio monitors. It's when they're thinking about studio monitors, thinking only about their studio monitors and not studio monitoring as a system. MixCon is in full swing. It's been a great event so far. We have a whole bunch of major masterclasses with major producers, engineers, mixers, and we've also got a whole bunch of these workshops. Go over to mix-con.com. That's mix-con.com, where you can sign up for presentations with all of the major MixCon mixers. We got Andrew Sheps coming up. Brent Colatalo just did one. Dana Nielsen did one. We've got Prizzy, Preston Reed, a great mixer, and Nico Bolas, and a whole bunch more. We've got workshops like this one around products or techniques or concepts. And there's also a big MixCon giveaway you can check out. We are giving away tens of thousands of dollars worth of free gear in the MixCon mega giveaway. So go ahead and check that one out. All this MixCon stuff that we're giving away and all the free content and the masterclasses are thanks to our sponsors. And the sponsor on this one is a supernatural fit. It is Adam Audio. Adam make amazing studio monitors. I have right over my shoulder on either side, actually, a couple of speakers from Adam. I've got, let me see if I can pull up my main shot here, some Adam A-series right here. These are the A4Vs, and over my other shoulder, the A77H, the horizontal one. They make great studio monitors. I've been loving their stuff since the early 2000s. I am an Adam fanboy, always have been, always will be. And I'll talk about why I like their studio monitors. But today's workshop here is going to be really all about getting the most out of your monitors, regardless of what brand of studio monitors you go with. All right, with all of that out of the way, let's get right into the meat of some of the ideas for today. What are the most common studio monitoring mistakes, and what should you do instead? Well, I already gave away the big one. Mistake number one is when you're thinking about studio monitors, of just thinking about studio monitors and selecting the right studio monitors for your budget. But there are at least 4 components to good studio monitoring to making good decisions in the mix. And if you neglect these other 3 major components, which most people do, you're going to have a bad time. And they're going to get more, I'm going to say, important in the sense that you'll get even greater returns for a really small investment as we go on in these principles. So the very first area where people make their studio monitoring mistakes is in speaker selection. And this is one of the most obvious ones that we'll go over right now. It's the thing that jumps to people's minds when they think about studio monitoring. They know that they need good speakers and or maybe good headphones to make good mixing choices. But what does good even mean, man? Well, when it comes to studio monitoring, the main idea that's thrown out there is flat studio monitors. No studio monitors that exist are perfectly flat. Never have been, never will be. However, they can get pretty darn close these days, especially with DSP-assisted monitors like the Adam A-series that I have over here over my shoulder. So getting studio monitors to be pretty darn close to flat has become one of the easiest things in studio monitor design. However, a lot of studio monitors are not particularly flat by design, and some of the most popular studio monitors are not particularly flat by design. Often, studio monitors are voiced to sound appealing in a quick shootout. If you go to a musical instrument store, whether that's as musicians, what's it called? Guitar Center, are they still around? Sam Ash, are they still around? I don't know. It's been a long time since I've been into a physical music store. Alto Music, that's a good physical music store if you're in the New York area. But if you're near any music stores or trade shows, a lot of speakers are designed to win in quick sip tests against other speakers. And one of the biggest mistakes people make around speaker selection is selecting speakers that just sound good to them. And I hear about a lot of people who love the sound of their studio monitors, who have studio monitors where they say, man, there's just such great clarity in them. I love these monitors. What they don't tell me that they love their mixes. So rather than going for the monitors that hype you up the most, if mixing and mastering and critical listening is the goal, speakers that are revealing, that tell you the truth, are the goal. And this often leads to speakers that are voiced a little on the flatter and possibly more boring side of things. Now, why is this? Long story short, all sorts of different speaker systems are skewed in different ways. Some people will say, since everyone's listening on their phones, why not just mix everything so it sounds good on a phone or a laptop? But some other people are listening on systems that might be a little Bluetooth speaker that's halfway across the room that sounds relatively boomy and muffled because it's off in the corner somewhere. So out in the world, we don't have control over what systems people are listening on. However, if you take the average of all of the speaker systems that are out there, some of them too boomy, some of them too bright, some of them too thin, some of them too dark and muddy, and you average them all together, the average of all of those ways that speakers can be wrong is flat. So if you can make a mix sound good on flat speakers, they'll sound good everywhere. This is the low-hanging fruit. But we're going to get into ideas that are a little bit less talked about and how to get even more out of each of those ideas in just a moment. I just want to finish up on this idea of speaker selection. Sometimes when you are focusing on tracking or producing, you do want a speaker that is maybe a little bit more hyped up, a little bit more exciting. The great thing about flat speakers is that they make you work harder for a great sounding mix. And if your mix sounds great there, it's more likely that it sounds great and translates to a wide variety of systems. But sometimes we want our speakers to lie to us just like a little bit to keep us and the clients inspired. So in those cases, you might want a speaker that's a little bit hyped up, that is trying a little bit hard just to sound nice to keep you inspired. And the Atoms do that too. That's one of the things I like about the A series. They have two voicings out of the box on the back of these speakers. I'll bring one of them over. Are these the A4s or I pull out the A7s? My goodness. All right. On the back here, you have two voicings that you can put it in. There's this UNR mode, which is a little bit prettier, ever so slightly more hyped up, as well as the flat mode. And with these EQ switches in the back, you can make it into a slightly more flattering speaker, a slightly more detailed and hyped sounding speaker, if you want that a little bit of extra prettiness. The other thing that I'll say is if you are going to select a speaker that skews from flat, it's good for that speaker to skew from flat in a way that's useful and helpful. There, I'm going to mention the Atom T series as being a great option. I've pulled up here their Atom A series, which are voiced very, very flat. But just as an example, similar concepts apply to other brands as well. But if you look at the Atom T series, their most affordable line, they skew from flat ever so slightly by having a little bit of a lift in the high frequencies, I would say in what I might call the lower highs. I'd have to look at it on a chart. I can't remember exactly where it is, but there's a slight lift, maybe in that 8K to 12K region, somewhere in there. And it gives the speaker just a tiny bit more detail while also helping beginning mixers, I think, fix problems in their mix. Beginning mixers, one of the big problems that they have is often their mixes are too dark, too mid-rangey, too bottom-heavy, and they just sound kind of veiled and muffled and a little boxy compared to what final commercial mixes sound like. So if you get a speaker that's flatter through the mid-range, not as hyped up, not as super clear sounding, they can help you open up your mix and start to make it a little bit more fun and detailed and hyped up sounding in the actual mix. But with that said, another common problem among beginning mixers is they'll have a mix that's kind of a little veiled and murky and woofy sounding, but they'll also have excessive sibilance in their vocals and cymbals. And I got to tell you, as a mastering engineer, when I master stuff for beginning mixers, that is the trademark sound. A dull, dark sounding mix, except for the vocal, which is overly sibilant, and except for the cymbals, which are overly bright compared to everything else. And then when you try to brighten up the mix a little bit, like it should be done in mastering on most beginning mixes, now the sibilance on the vocal and the high end on the cymbals is even more of a problem. So the cool thing about the T series, they're priced for beginning mixers, and I think they're voiced perfectly for beginning mixers because they're flat, full-bodied through the lows and the mids, and then there's just this little bit of an extra tiny bit of sparkle and presence right in the low-high region where beginning mixers are most likely to over-accent their cymbals and over-accent the sibilance in their high frequencies. So if you're going to skew from flat with a set of speakers, make sure it's skewed from flat in a way that helps you. And the T-Series is a great example of that for beginners. If you are ready, I think, for a higher end speaker, I'm a absolutely huge fan of the A-Series. I think they're one of the best bets and best bangs for the buck for more of a serious professional and semi-pro studio, but you can get great results out of the T-Series as well. There's also other speakers that I could recommend in these price ranges, but we're not talking about them today because Adam is a sponsor and they're giving away Adam monitors and Adam headphones in the MixCon mega giveaway. So go check that out. They're giving away a set of T-Series monitors, a T-Series sub. They might be giving away their new headphones too, which are fantastic. The H200s, you got to try those out. All right, back on with the main ideas we're trying to go over today. And I apologize if I keep on slicking back my hair on today's live stream because I just got out of the shower and I'm noticing it's all verklempt. Okay, I'm not sure if I use the word verklempt properly. You have to tell me if you know Yiddish that doesn't actually exist. Okay, onwards into the future. The next major monitoring mistake, we talked about not thinking of monitoring as a system, and now we're into the 4 major categories people make mistakes in. Number 1 is speaker selection. But number 2 is arguably more important than speaker selection. And these are going to keep on getting more important as they go along. And once I get through all of them, I will go ahead and I will check out your chats that are coming in now. Speaking of which, I'll take a quick look at them at the moment. Yo, how's everybody doing in the chats? Good to have you here. Bernardo, good to have you here. Joannaby, Mark, Kill Pickle, what a name. All right, so number 2 major thing that people mess up on is room treatment. This is arguably more important than speaker selection. And the biggest way people mess up when it comes to room treatment is by not having any, or not having sufficient room treatment, or thinking about when they want studio monitors, thinking about only the studio monitors and creating a studio monitor budget rather than a studio monitoring budget. You'll notice one of the most prominent things in my shop behind me is not just the gold and platinum records that are back there that I have for mastering, and I have a little YouTube silver plaque there for a whole bunch of subscribers and speakers that I like and other stuff that are mostly just set dressing, and microphones that I like that are mostly just set dressing. Other than that stuff, what's prominent back there? Those panels. People comment about the videos constantly. What are those panels? What are those? Those are cool. They are acoustic panels. They are part diffusion, part absorption. And if you have no acoustic paneling in your studio, you're probably going to have a bad time. The actual room environment in which you put your speakers is so much more important than the actual speakers themselves. The difference from room to room in EQ curve is so much bigger than the difference from one brand of studio monitors to another, that this is another place you should be putting some budget. And it is another reason that it's awesome that brands like Adam have things not just like the A-Series, but also like the T-Series, which we brought up a little bit earlier, which cost dramatically less. I would honestly, if you had something like a $1,500 budget for speakers, and that was your monitoring budget, I might steer you towards the less expensive T-Series plus acoustic treatment, then steer you towards the higher end A-Series with no acoustic treatment. Because I want you to get out of the habit of thinking about a studio monitor budget and start thinking about a studio monitoring budget. And Adam know that this is so important that they're willing to sponsor a live stream where they know I'm going to say to people, don't spend all of your money on speakers, spend it on the whole monitoring system. Part 2 of which is acoustic treatment. But I'm going to get into something in a moment that is arguably even more powerful than acoustic treatment. Acoustic treatment, you can get some big returns from if you're willing to spend $1,000 to $2,000 on pre-made panels, or perhaps several $100s and some elbow grease. The biggest thing I would start with for the average DIY room where you're not tuning bass traps and getting an acoustic consultant to have specifically targeted tuned bass traps in your room would be to go with, in the corner, I would start with 6-inch fiberglass panels that are mounted in the corners that are going to help give you some attenuation of giant room modes and room nodes in the low end, because the low end is the hardest part to get right in your room. And starting with 6-inch panels in the corners is a big help with that. The thicker you can go with panels in general, the better, because they're going to attenuate lower frequencies and not just higher ones. But If you want to save some money, just getting rid of some of the flutter echo in your room with 2 and 4 inch panels can be helpful as well. But there is going to come a moment when you've started to do room treatment that you will realize you'll hit diminishing returns, and you're going to have to spend a lot more to get small benefits and increases in fidelity, which leads us to item number 3 in the system of monitoring, which is EQ correction. And again, the biggest number one mistake here is not doing it. The biggest number one mistake around room treatment is not doing it. And probably the second biggest is going for ineffective room treatment. Panels that are too thin aren't doing anything about the low frequency in your space. But number 3 here, EQ correction, number one mistake these days, I think, is not doing it. There's so many great solutions out there. There's so much return for so little money invested that it's a no-brainer in most studios. And the more that you have slacked off on room treatment, the more that you need EQ correction. And I do know today some very good mixers who are working in minimally treated rooms using EQ correction and are getting tremendous results. A specific example I can think about is someone who did a MixCon Masterclass for us recently. Let me bring that up. Snarky Puppy and Nick Hard. And he has exactly one of the options you can go with. Here's his mixing masterclass from, I think, just last year he did for us, where he takes us through an entire mix of a Snarky Puppy track. And you can see he has some acoustic panels here in the walls, but not on all of them. It's fairly minimally treated room. But he has good Atom audio monitors, and he is using SonarWorks EQ correction on his speakers. And he is in a space that is arguably not that much different from the average bedroom studio that someone might be in, or the average spare room or guest room or living room studio that someone might have, or garage studio. There's just a few panels up on the wall, good sounding monitors, and EQ correction, and he makes sure that he really stays within the sweet spot of those studio monitors. Because if you're not going to move around a lot, it is somewhat plausible that you can get microphones, measurement microphones, into the spot where you can do most of your listening and get your key listening position to sound pretty good. And as long as you don't move out of that position, the EQ correction can be surprisingly good. So he's able to spend a little bit less on acoustic treatment, mostly killing things like flutter echo. And then the low frequency problems that he's experiencing at his listening position are somewhat ameliorated from having the EQ correction. Now, there's so much more detail we could go into here. We could go into the idea of actually placing your speakers in the room and how they're placed being the first step in both room treatment and EQ correction. And honestly, we could do a whole full-length video about just placing the speakers properly in the room. And I have. Look for another video sponsored by another speaker company on exactly that topic elsewhere on this channel if you want to learn more about placing your speakers. And there's a couple philosophies about how to go about that. One way here is to actually place your speakers in one of the worst places. Most speaker manufacturers will recommend that you don't put your speakers so that the back of them are very close to a wall where you're going to get a lot of boundary interference. However, there's actually a very predictable issue that comes up when you do have the back of your speaker very close to a wall, and that is a fairly predictable low frequency lift. And some people think actually the best thing you can do is put your speakers close to a wall, get a really predictable low frequency lift out of them, and then just dial that down with the EQ that's built in to the back of a set of speakers like these, just shelving down your lows a little bit. Another way to go about it is to find an ideal place for your speakers that minimizes some of your room modes and nodes, and then do more specific EQ treatment from there, which we'll talk about in just a second. I'm going to switch over so I don't have to hold up these giant heavy speakers the entire time. Go over to Adam's website so we can take a quick look at some of the options that they offer here for EQ. So a lot of speaker companies have some type of EQ built in, but I think Atom is one of the companies to do it the best with their new A control system. So by plugging your Atom audio speakers into a computer with an Ethernet cable, you get instant access to this A control app. This is available on the A series. I think the S series has something similar. I don't think the T series can take advantage of this. But I have a whole bunch of videos brought up here where we can see them a little bit more closely. Let me get to, here's a good view, I think, of their T series, if you can see my screen here. You have the ability to go in with this 6-band EQ and do really specific EQ adjustments. So if you know that there's a particular room mode or room node, you can go in and dial that in manually into the speaker itself. There's also a very simple way of using this tool set, which just basically gives you access to the controls that are on the front, on the back. So you can adjust the built-in EQ switches, or you can go into the 6-band EQ mode. And it also does work with SonarWorks. And SonarWorks, their Sound ID reference tool, is probably one of the easiest, most user-friendly speaker calibrations that are out there. You get a microphone, you measure your speakers, and it comes back to you with a recommended EQ correction curve to flatten out the speakers. And you can basically export a file from SonarWorks and again, load it into your Atom audio speakers. Atom is one of the few brands that's doing this. So there's 3 methods here. 1, there's 4 dip switches, or not actually dip switches, they're digital buttons here that correct some of the most common complaints about EQ and in-room performance in speakers. There is a low shelf, which can help you dial up or down the low frequency slightly. There is a high shelf, which can help increase or decrease extreme treble slightly. There's also a presence button and a button option for a desk, which basically compensates for some of the most common boundary interference of signals bouncing off of desks and creating, again, fairly predictable lifts up in fairly predictable frequency areas. You can go beyond that by using something fancy like Room EQ Wizard. That's a free tool that lets you take your own measurements, find out where the problems are in your room, and then go ahead and dial that in manually using the A-Control software that comes with these guys. Or 3, you do something like the Sound ID reference calibration, get your calibration done, and then load it right into the speaker itself. Now, one other thing I'm going to say that I don't know if it's almost to the place where it's a mistake now to not do it around EQ correction. And that, I'm going to say, is not having a hardware-based solution for EQ correction. It is very new that a handful of speaker companies, 2 of my favorite speaker companies, Atom being one of them, are some of the only companies doing it so far, which is to integrate really good EQ correction directly into the speaker. And I think doing it that way is much better than doing it inside your computer for a few reasons. The first reason is that it is so much easier if you're in an environment where you have multiple speakers to switch between. Having your correction inside your speaker is way better than running a plugin in your computer or a system-wide app inside of your computer. One of the issues, if you have, say, your main set of monitors, and then maybe a secondary set of monitors like the Oratones over my shoulder there, or a pair of NS10s, or a boombox, or some headphones that you want to monitor on, if you have a system-wide application running on your computer, or if you have a plugin running in your DAW to do your EQ correction, then that EQ correction is going to apply not just to the set of speakers that you're trying to tune, but to any other set of speakers that you switch to and to your headphones. So now if I want to switch between my main speakers and my Oratones or boombox for a secondary reference check, I'm going to have to remember to, wait, I have to disable SonarWorks or disable the EQ plugin that I have on my monitoring chain, disable that, now switch speakers, and now when I switch back again, re-enable it. And I just know that I'm going to forget that probably more often than I'd like to admit. Same thing with switching over to headphones. Are you doing now the same EQ correction on your headphones as your speakers? That's bad news. But there's additional reasons that doing it inside the speaker is substantially better. And one of them is that there's much less room for accidents. I know someone who tried one of these system-wide applications to tune his speakers, and it crashed on him in the middle of a mix, and it sent crazy loud signal through his headphones that he was mixing on, blew up his ears, and he couldn't listen for like the rest of the day. These kinds of things can happen. And face it, having an application crash or a plugin crash in your computer is much more likely and much more common than your studio monitors, the DSP in there crashing. Chances are, if you have a modern set of studio monitors, there's DSP in it. And can you think of like literally a single time that your studio monitors crashed? I will wait. The answer is probably no. So that's one of the reasons that loading it into the speaker itself, like Atom Audio allows you to now do, is better. So we've got two big reasons. One, easier to switch between speakers. Don't have to remember to bypass and unbypass stuff. Two is that you're less likely to blow up your ears, have the thing crash in the middle of mixing, gets turned off by accident. It's only being applied to, say, as a plugin in your DAW, but it's not being applied to reference material that you're listening to. That's a problem. And then the third big thing is these speakers already have a DSP chip in them. All speakers that have DSP in them, to make them extra flat, to make them more phase aligned, this is how most great speakers are designed now. They are doing a stage of A to D and D to A conversion, and they're applying a little bit of latency to do that EQ correction and phase alignment. If you now add additional processing into your chain outside of the speaker, you're potentially adding additional A to D and D to A if it's a separate hardware device. But even if it's not, potentially adding additional latency into your monitoring chain by adding on another tool. And really good EQ treatment and EQ correction for speakers to do time alignment and phase alignment properly, they need a little bit of latency, a little bit of delay, and the zero latency versions of EQs aren't really going to do that. So if you want to get the most out of DSP speakers, there's going to be a tiny bit of latency. And if you double that with another zero latency EQ, now that latency might become meaningful to the point where it's awkward performing. So this is yet another reason you can avoid additional steps of A to D and D to A and additional latency by using the DSP that's already in the darn speaker to begin with. So this is me ranting about why EQ correction today is good and why you should probably do it inside your speaker rather than inside of your computer or even inside of an interface, because this is something that's starting to become available now. EQ correction inside your interface. But again, you are adding on yet another stage of processing that could increase latency. And then the last big mistake that people make around studio monitoring is the fourth and arguably the most important part of the system of your monitors. Piece number one of your monitoring system is your studio monitors. We talked about that. Piece number two in your monitoring system is your actual room environment that they're going to be in. We talked about that. Piece number three of your studio monitoring system is EQ correction, which I think today is an indispensable part of good monitoring. And number four is you. You are the other, arguably most important part of your studio monitoring system. Tuning your studio monitors is not only about tuning your monitors to the room, tuning your room so all monitors sound better in it, using EQ correction to help adjust both the system of your speakers and your room and make them work better together. But you have to tune not only all three of those things, but you have to tune yourself. You are an instrument. Your ears are part of your instrument. And you have to constantly remind yourself of what good sounds like in your room and on your studio monitors. Because if you don't, you will make bad decisions and you will forget what good sounds like in your room. If you are not referencing, if you're not listening to great sounding records that you love the sound of in your space regularly, then I'm going to tell you what, you don't know what good sounds like in your room and you're not going to make good choices. Every once in a while, I'll get a mix from a mastering client and something will be really off to me. Like they'll have way more low end than all their favorite records or way more top end than all their favorite records. And I'll adjust it and bring it more into line with like how their actual genre sounds. And sometimes I'll send them back that master and they'll listen to it and say, hey, why isn't there as much bass on this record anymore? It sounds different. And it's like, okay, well, how do you know it had the right amount of bass before you sent it to me? And they're like, well, it just sounded good to me in my room. It's like, okay, compared to what? They're like, what do you mean compared to what? Like, what records were you comparing it to that made you think that that was a good amount of low-end energy? And they're like, oh, well, I didn't listen to any records. I don't want like that messing with my vibe, man, and, copycatting other artists. I get it. Don't be a copycat. Don't. But how do you know what a good amount of low-end sounds like in your room if you've never listened to great-sounding records in your room and hear what the low-end sounds like? So every once in a while with a more beginning client, I'll run into that thing where I will give them like what is objectively a much better master and much closer to what every record that they love actually sounds like. And they'll hear it and they'll be like, can you make it more like how it was originally? Now, if that person is an advanced mixer, often if a mastering engineer does too much, that is a great thing to say. Hey man, I know you're trying to razzle dazzle me here, but I actually like the way the mix sounded. Can we go back closer to how it sounded? If they're like an advanced and good mixer, then they're probably right, and you probably did too much and tried to impress them. But when the mixer is very new and the mastering engineer is very experienced, and that happens, it's usually because the mixer developed preconceived notions out of thin air of what music should sound like in their space, based on not listening to anything at all. And when their record came back to them sounding different, they went, this sounds different. Can you make it how it was before? But you can only confidently make that assessment. You can only confidently say, I love how much low end was there before. I love how much high end was there before. If you know what a good amount of low end and a good amount of high end sounds like in your room. And this is the best one because it's free. You could potentially ignore all the other three things that I've said so far in this video. Ignore everything I've said about selecting great speakers that are voiced in a way that are going to help make you good decisions. You could ignore the stuff I said about putting them into a good room. And you could even ignore the stuff I said about all the EQ correction and the benefits you can get in understanding your low end so much better. You could ignore all three of those things and do them wrong. If you just listen to enough great sounding records in your studio space, in the exact place where you're going to be mixing, and on the same day that you're doing your mixes or productions, remind yourself what great sounding records sound like in your space. Because that will give you your sonic North Star of what you should be shooting for, how bright you should go, how dark you should go, how bass heavy you should go, how much mid-range you should have, how loud your vocal should be. And this one is free, and it's the lowest hanging fruit. But in a way, it's the hardest to do because it requires you changing your behavior, developing skills, and upgrading the computer in between your ears. We have a whole bunch of great training and courses to help you with that kind of stuff, mixing breakthroughs, mastering demystified, compression breakthroughs, EQ breakthroughs, all that stuff. Go check them out. They're all free. Not free. They are free to try in the sense that there is a money-back guarantee, which means if you don't like them, they are free. So you can return them. I never even have to know about it. Check out all those great courses and stuff. But today, what I really want to shout out is our MixCon sponsors. Big shout out and thanks to Atom Audio for making some of my favorite mixing tools, which are studio monitors. The A-Series is absolutely awesome. That A-Control app allows you to use the DSP that's inside of the speaker. No additional trips, no additional latency beyond what's just inherently in a speaker. And using that to create either 6-band EQ or a full multi-point SonarWorks treatment, or the very simple, easy-to-use EQs. If the A range is a little bit too expensive for your blood, I seriously recommend their T-Series. And honestly, if you have a lower budget, the T-Series with some room treatment and with something like SonarWorks or some other EQ correction system could be even the better way to go for you. These are ever so slightly skewed from flat, the T-Series, but again, in a way that really, I think, benefits beginning and intermediate mixers. If you want potentially some free speakers and headphones and software and other stuff, go over to mix-con.com. That's mix-con.com and sign up for the MixCon Mega Giveaway there, where there are 3 chances to win over $10,000 worth of free gear. Yes, people really do win this stuff. It is definitely not a scam. Also, over at mix-con.com, you can sign up for all the other masterclasses that are coming. We've got this whole schedule, a whole bunch of great presentations coming. If you want to know about the live premieres for all of these, we got great speakers coming up. We got Andrew Sheps coming. We got Brent Colatalo. We got Dana Nielsen. We got Preston Prizzy Reed. These are people who have worked with Kanye West, Usher, Neil Young, Prince, Buffalo Springfield, Green Day, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Black Sabbath, U2, Kendrick Lamar, Lorde, Lana Del Rey, Taylor Swift, Smashing Pumpkins, Rihanna, Adele, Post Malone. These are major producers, engineers giving us full-length masterclasses, and after each one of them is a Q&A, and we also have a whole bunch more workshops like this one coming up. I hope you've enjoyed it. Right before I get out of here, let me go through some of your comments here. Everyone in here telling me what speakers they are using. Some of them, Mark says he's actually checking out this right now, and a pair of Adam A7Xs, which are fantastic speakers. So thank you all for being here for the live. Since there's no major questions about the stuff, hopefully I did a thorough job explaining it. So I'll just shout out and say hello and thanks to Joannaby, Eldo, Counterspell, Ocean X, Joannaby, Bernardo, VSR, Mark, and everyone else here who's joining us on the live stream. Thanks again for hanging out with me. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Big shout out and thanks to Adam Audio. Go check out MixCon. Big thanks to you for hanging out with me. See you next time.